Hello everybody, it's Colin Ellis here. Welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast for Monday the 28th of February 2022, and it's March already tomorrow. It's flying by this year, it's absolutely flying by. Now I've got a lot to cover in the podcast there. I feel like I always say that and then get immediately sidetracked into something else. Let's do the coffee first. Because today's coffee is from Code Black Roasters, and again, the roastery is right near home. Actually, it's since doing this podcast, I kind of realised just how many coffee roasters there are within 15 minutes. Like the real coffee roasting area of Melbourne. So yeah, Code Black, and it's a Mexican coffee. It's called, now I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, so feel free to correct me, Mexicans. Zempoalehuatl. It's called. I think that's how you pronounce it. Which is named after a tree. It's named after, they've got these really tall shade trees in Mexico, and it's from there. It's used a purple honey process, and it's from the Veracruz region of Mexico. It's a bourbon varietal, and it says it's got notes of pomegranate, berries, maple, and black tea. So let me just give this a whirl here. Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah, definitely getting pomegranate. Yeah, a bit of black tea. I'm not a fan of black tea, I have to say. Yeah, it's nice. It's not been my favourite. Some mornings you need a coffee, right? Some mornings you're like, definitely. Today's one of those days. I just need a coffee this morning. And I want to talk a little bit about feedback today, or providing constructive feedback, because after last week's podcast, which is all about Toxic Boss, which loads of you have listened to, so thank you so much. Oh, and I want to make a big shout out to I don't really look at the stats for the podcast. I don't know why. I don't know. I just hope people listen to it. It's one of those things. It's not something I'm like, a million people need to listen a week, otherwise it's been a complete failure. It's like when people share stuff and then kind of judge how good it is by the number of likes it's got. But anyway, lots of people listen to the podcast, which is great. But I had a look at the Anchor, who I share it through. Been bought by Spotify now, of course they have. They do all of these stats, and it shows me the percentage of where everybody's from, so I just want to make a big shout out to the person who listens to the podcast in Georgia. For my US listeners, yes, that's a country, not just a state. And also the one person who listens in Chile. So hello to you, and to everybody else, of course. But I had an email this week from Jake, who said that he saw on LinkedIn that I'd been out of the UK for 15 years. So slightly creepy, Jake, if I'm honest, that you're looking at LinkedIn and calculating the number of years that I've been out of the UK. But that's fine. It's fine. It's not like you're sending me pictures of yourself. That would be weird. Yes, is it me, or is LinkedIn becoming more like Facebook? Is it? But Colin, you're part of the problem, because you shared a picture of yourself as a 4-year-old boy. Yeah, I did. I totally did that. I had some new profile pictures done, and I wanted just to, because I would get comments about the way that I dress, and I found a picture of myself as a 4-year-old dressed very, very formally, which I posted on LinkedIn. So I am part of the problem. But I read this thing about how Facebook. See, this is what I do. I get sidetracked straight away. How Facebook, for the first time last month, so I'm presuming this is January, it actually lost users in the US. Now, apparently that's big, because it's never done that. I think I'm getting this right, that it's never done that. And with the whole Meta thing, I went on for it. I don't really use Facebook, to be honest. I have a Facebook. I'm Gen X, right? So I have a Facebook account. It's not like, kind of Gen Z. The kids are like, Facebook, oh my God. And so, of course, Facebook recognise this, which is why they're buying up all the stuff that's popular with Gen Z and millennials. I don't really use it, but we have a Facebook for Business account. and they've changed it to Meta for business. And like immediately I'm like, well, I don't want to ever use this ever again. So anyway, where was I going with this? Oh yes, LinkedIn. I feel like people are like, we don't want to use Facebook anymore. We don't like Facebook anymore. Let's just post all of the stuff that we used to post on Facebook. Let's post that on LinkedIn. Anyway, what was it? Oh yeah, Jake, and 15 years. And yet listening to you, you keep your accent. How do you do this? Well, there's a couple of things, Jake, if you know anything about linguistics. It's very hard to unlearn your actual accent as an adult. It's very hard to do that. So if you're a child, it becomes easier to pick up because, like anything, these things aren't ingrained in your brain. And obviously the older you get, the harder it is to unlearn some of those linguistics. Secondly, my wife's from the same part of the country as me, but like where the River Mersey is, there's like a little, what would you call it? How would they describe it? It's like, there's a river, and on one side of the river there's like a peninsula. It's called the Wirral. Like it's like posh. It's the posh bit of Liverpool, and then the other side is just the normal, not posh side. And she's from the same side, so we've got similar accents. And I'm sure for any actual people in England listening to this, and I'm sure I'm hoping to get back there this year to see the family, they'll be like, "Why are you talking like that? Why are you talking Australian? What are you saying words like awesome for?" So I think there's certain words like good day. Like I don't really say that. Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, there was a TV show called The Fast Show. When I was growing up, I must have been in my 20s. There was a TV show called The Fast Show, comedy show, really, really good. Paul Whitehouse, Charlie Hickson, and there was a sketch on the G'day. It was Australian. Welcome to That's Amazing with me, Cal Hooper. And that's just how I think of Australian. That's not a knife. This is a knife. But I can't do an Australian accent. Just rubbish at doing that. So yeah, there you go, Jake. That's how I keep the accent. It's hard to unlearn, and surrounded by people who talk the same as me. Although the kids are gradually turning. My daughter's accent's definitely not English. Someone else got in touch, didn't want their name read out. Thanks so much for the Toxic Boss podcast. What happens when they don't listen? It's a really tough one, that. And I mentioned it a little bit on the podcast, but and I'm going to cover constructive feedback to give you some ideas of some things you can say and should say. But it's really, really tough when they won't listen. And you really are forced into making a decision. And, I did that. What happened to me once, where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I've done everything that I can do to be the best human being that I can. I've done my bit to let you know how you're behaving, and nothing really changed. And I felt for him a little bit because he was getting so much pressure from elsewhere, but he just seemed unable to modify his own behavior, and that really created this level of toxicity within the culture. And so I left. I didn't necessarily want to. We'd worked really, really hard to create a great team culture. Felt like I was leaving the team in the lurch a little bit, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it, and nor did I want to do it. But it's a risk. It's a risk. Like I think I said on the podcast, it's really tough when people are like, "Oh, if you don't like it, just leave." Like that's just not the reality for most people. It wasn't the reality for me at the time. I suppose in my favour was I had a good reputation, and there were other opportunities. But that's not always the case, and I think we forget that so many people around the world are suffering in so many stressful situations, and if you see someone who's struggling, it doesn't matter whether you're on their team, it doesn't matter, if you've been there a long time, they've not been long. Well, if you see someone struggling, like, be a good human and just reach out and ask them if they're okay. For some people, they feel better just talking about it sometimes. But it is a tough one when they won't listen. And segue into feedback. So continual feedback is a hallmark of great culture, but you have to know how to do it well. Now, another famous Scouser, another famous Liverpudlian, this guy called Ken Blanchard, who's an educator who died a couple of years ago, unfortunately. And he used this phrase, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I remember reading about it. It wasn't actually, he actually took it from someone else that he worked with who used it in relation to sports teams and how sports teams get better. He said, I remember reading this article from Ken Blanchard, and he said, can you imagine training for the Olympics and never being given any feedback on like how fast you ran, your technique, your preparation, your diet? Like if you want to win the race, then there's a bunch of things you have to do, and you have to do them in a particular way, which is why you pay a coach, right? And it's the coach's job is to provide continual feedback such that you can achieve the level of performance that you need to achieve. You know, I've talked about, I think I might have talked about this in the podcast in the past, about this concept of winning, and it's become a bad thing when really what's bad is winning at all costs. You know, kind of just leaving bodies strewn everywhere. Winning is a positive thing for teams, but only when you win together and you help each other. And a big part of that, of course, a big part of that is providing feedback on the things that you do and the things that you're not doing. Now, critical to feedback, and this is the bit that everybody misses, is actually agreeing what the culture is up front. Because what happens often is that you're just merrily doing your job, and then one day you get feedback and it's just not part of the culture at all. Now, some organisations are better than others at having it part of their culture. So Culture Amp, they provide employee listening tools, I suppose they would call it. They have a value. One of their values is learn faster through feedback. So it's inherent within their culture. It's one of those values that provide emotional connection for employees, and they're the things that keep us connected. So if you've got a value that you learn faster through feedback, then it's something that you can expect. More often than not, what happens in most cultures is kind of managers save up all of the negative stuff and then just load it on you. Oh, here's, I don't know if anyone's told you this, but, and you're like, what? Where did that come from? Why have you been saving that? Why didn't you tell me 3 months ago? I used to hate that as part of the annual performance. I mean, I hated annual performance reviews anyway. Annual performance reviews are just a box ticking exercise to justify some kind of really rubbish pay process. They're just terrible. They really, really are. And I used to hate the form fill. If you do annual performance review, you've really got to look at yourself and say, should we be doing it? Have I done something on annual performance reviews? I should maybe talk about that. Because most managers save it up and then it's just all form filling to justify why you shouldn't get a pay rise. And that's not what we're looking for. I think if culturally, if you're looking to get incrementally better over time, what you need to do, and that's important, because like giving feedback all at once, you're not going to grow. In fact, it's more likely you're going to take it personally. When you give feedback incrementally over time, it gives you these real opportunities for growth. And you want that to be part of your culture. None of us are the finished article. None of us are. And I think, for any individual coming into their job, you kind of need to understand yourself. You need to understand what are your personality strengths, what are your personality opportunities for improvement. You need to kind of understand the skills you need to be able to do your job really well. You need to have that forward plan for yourself every year. And then obviously, as you go through your working weeks and your working months, you're going to do some things well. And then there are some things that you're not going to do as well. And when you do the things well and don't do the things as well, in both situations, there should be feedback. And so if you're a manager here, we often think of constructive feedback and never constructive criticism, because it's still criticism. I hate that phrase. Oh, I can take some constructive criticism. Action people love giving you constructive criticism. When what you need is constructive feedback. So feedback that's designed to help you grow and get better at something. And Your job when you're on the receiving end of feedback is to receive it with grace, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. Obviously, if it's positive feedback, that's great. It kind of refills those tanks those internal tanks that we have. It's like, oh, I'm doing a good job. Everyone wants to hear that they're doing a good job. Like everybody does. And it just provides that, I don't know, that little reminder that we're doing the right things. And we call it positive reinforcement, right? And what you want to do is provide positive reinforcement of the behavior. And it's same when you're providing kind of feedback on some of the things to be improved. If you make it about the behavior, what you're talking about is an area of an individual where they can grow, rather than characterizing it as something that's unique to that individual. Oh, this is so typical of you, like the way that I said that sounded really bad, but you know what I mean, is like, oh, it's so typical of you don't do this, your blind spot is. I think it's, if you're talking about personality, you can say, oh, people with similar personalities, they find it difficult to focus. I understand that. What we're looking for here is greater discipline. So when you make it about the behavior, what you're really doing is helping someone to relearn or learn for the first time a different way of doing things, such that they can get to that point where they feel like they're able to achieve whatever they need to achieve, and that they have your support. And so I often think that personal success and team success as well, what that requires is self-awareness on the behalf of the individual, then continual feedback, and that's where you get success. Continual feedback being positive and negative. And interestingly, I interviewed Didier Elzinga, who's the CEO of Culture Amp, for my Culture Makers podcast, which I'm just about to start recording the third season of that. And he said that feedback is important for positive behavior change. Now, parents listening to this, that with your kids, and of course every adult as well knows that when we got feedback from our parents, it was about the behaviors that they wanted to see. With our kids, we're very quick to praise things like courage, and we talk about things like humility, and I think my parents were like, don't be a big head. Whereas we're more like, oh yeah, it's important that you show a little bit more humility here. Don't make it about yourself. So self-awareness and feedback, but from a team and a cultural perspective, it needs to be baked in to the way that you do things, right? It needs to be part of your team culture. So my friend Georgia, who's an expert on, it was her birthday at the weekend. Happy birthday, Georgia. I was hungover on Sunday. Thanks for that. I know you didn't make me drink alcohol. I just was. She's an expert on feedback. She's got some great books on feedback. Fixing feedback is awesome. But she says about feedback that high performers want it and low performers need it. And I think too often what managers do is wait too long to provide feedback because there's a fear. I think we're very good at telling ourselves stories about what's going to happen when we deliver feedback, and that stops us doing it. So I think giving constructive feedback is super important. And it's really, really important that it's timely, because what you can't afford to do is wait too long to provide feedback, and it's got to be specific. So something that I learned probably in my early 30s was this approach to feedback called SBI. It might even be, I can't remember who did it, who came up with it. I should check, really. I might do it online. Situation, behavior, impact. So situation, behavior, impact is essentially, as a manager, you're describing, so you kind of preface the feedback with the situation that you were in. So during the presentation you gave to the executive team on Monday, so situation, that's situation. Behavior, you were calm in your delivery and presented the information in a way that was easy to understand. And then impact. I'm proud of the work that you've done to deliver a speech that everyone took notice of and demonstrated your commitment to building your leadership skills. So that's a positive example of SBI. So describe the situation, describe the behavior, describe the impact. And then there's, in that positive example there, what you're doing is just saying to that, it's positive reinforcement. Great job. Well done, you. A more negative Exactly. Negative is a negative word, isn't it? A negative example would be during the meeting where Colin said he needed everyone's feedback by 5 p.m. today. You audibly expressed your frustrations as the behaviour at the timescales and suggested to Colin you weren't able to meet these. Impact, your behaviour brought embarrassment to both of us, undermined Colin and disrupted the meeting. So that actually happened. It actually happened. I remember saying to one of my direct reports, because it was one of his team, I said, listen, just provide a little bit of feedback on the behaviour. I was like, I understand if there's the exact scenario is I understand if he feels it's a bit of a stretch, but let's, rather than kind of doing the eye roll, the audible expression, by the way, the audibly expressed was a like literally that. I felt like it went on for 10 seconds. And then, so, provide some, that the SBI, that's how you talk about it. Let's provide that immediacy of constructive feedback, and then provide insights. And so one of the things that I used to do is like, here's one thing to think about, rather than, what you need to do next time is. So I would say, here's one thing to think about, rather than audibly expressing it, capture a note or ask to discuss it, or say to Colin, can we talk through that deadline, based on previous experience, here's what I've seen as the challenges. And so what we're doing is helping people to moderate that behavior by giving them insights in the things they need to do differently. Now, managers, you already recognize the challenge here is that you have to understand how to do this stuff well. And, in the last podcast, I talked about leadership development programs. This is the kind of stuff that we need to teach managers, such that they're able to provide feedback really well. More often than not, feedback, it feels like they're going into battle. Do you know what I mean? It feels stressful, and feedback should never feel stressful. Feedback can be enjoyable, providing that we've agreed the culture, we know what we're working towards, and everyone recognizes that in order to achieve those goals and to create that sense of vibrancy, feedback is a big part of that. Hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Have a great day wherever you are in the world, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Ta-ra for now.